The monastery was silent. Only the wind spoke, brushing through the cracks in the stone. Snow pressed heavy on the roof, cold as time itself. Inside, a single candle, trembling, alive. They slept in stone cells colder than the grave, yet somehow they stayed warm, not by fire, by faith. When winter pressed close, they didn't fight it, they breathed with it. Slow breath, steady prayer, still hearts. Warmth rose not from wood or wool, but from within. And if you ever face the cold, not the kind on your skin, but the one inside your chest, remember them. They didn't conquer winter, they understood it. They built their walls from stone cold, heavy, eternal. To most stone meant frost. To them, it meant warmth, waiting to be unlocked. At first, the monastery seemed cursed with cold. The wind would slide through the cracks, and each night the air turned sharp enough to bite. But the monks began to notice something strange when sunlight brushed the chapel walls, or when the kitchen hearth burned all day. The stones held the heat. Even after the fire died, the walls stayed warm to the touch. They realized their abbey wasn't a prison of stone. It was a battery. By day, it absorbed the warmth of prayer work and sun. By night, it returned that warmth quietly, steadily, faithfully. Their secret wasn't wealth or invention, it was rhythm. Thick mortar sealed the joints, packed earth floors, gathered the heat, and every shared breath helped warm the space. Slowly, their stone walls became companions, breathing warmth back through the long, frozen hours until dawn. Inside, the air hovered just above 45 degrees, barely enough to keep life alive, but more than enough to remind them they weren't alone. Outside, snow buried the world in silence. Inside, faith kept the temperature steady. They didn't fight the cold, they moved with it. Not resistance, harmony. Today, engineers call it thermal mass, they called it grace. So when the modern world complains of drafts and heating bills, remember those monks living in silence, wrapped in wool and prayer, turning cold stone into living warmth. They didn't need to conquer winter, they learned to live inside it. They had no feather beds, no wool mattresses, just bundles of dry straw. To most, it was nothing but farm waste. To them, it was nature's insulation. The stone floors beneath them were like ice, pulling heat away from their bodies through the night. But the monks learned a trick older than science itself. 2 layers of straw with a thin sheet of linen in between. That small gap trapped air, invisible, weightless, warm. It wasn't soft, not really. The straw rustled, poked, and had to be replaced each month before it turned damp. But when fresh and dry, it worked like a miracle. The cold stayed under the floor, the warmth stayed near the skin. Tests on similar hay mattresses show the microclimate above them, rising by 10 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to make the difference between shivering and sleeping, between survival and surrender. Their technique was simple, humble, and brilliant. They didn't need fancy fabric or heating stones. Just patience, rhythm, and the wisdom to listen to nature's design. Each monk lying on his straw bed was wrapped not in luxury, but in purpose. Every breath warmed the air beneath the linen. Every heartbeat added to the quiet living system that kept them through the longest nights. They didn't conquer the cold, they cooperated with it. Not defiance, balance. And centuries later, European farmers would rediscover the same truth, stacking hay into mattresses to sleep above the frost. Science calls it insulation. They called it grace. Their robes looked simple, plain brown, rough to the eye, but every fold was a layer of survival. Beneath that humble cloth lay an understanding of warmth that modern science would later name insulation. The monks wore their habits in rhythm linen closest to the skin, wool above it, then a thick cloak, and finally the hooded cowl. That cowl wasn't just for devotion, it created a pocket of air around the neck and head, nature's own heater. In those stone corridors where wind howled like distant prayer, that tiny layer made all the difference. Losing heat through the head and throat could kill faster than hunger, but wrapped in wool and breath, they stayed steady body temperature, holding above 60 degrees, even when frost claimed the walls. Their habit wasn't just a uniform, it was armor quiet, sacred practical, a fabric faith. You can almost hear it, the brush of wool sleeves as they moved in silence, the soft rustle of linen beneath. Each thread was a small defiance against the cold, not loud, not proud, just enduring. Centuries later, mountaineers and soldiers would rediscover this same wisdom-based layer insulation shell. Science gave it names thermal layering airflow management, but the monks had already lived it. They didn't chase warmth. They invited it to stay, not through comfort, through balance. Today, when we zip up fleece and shell jackets, we're wrapped in the same quiet genius that once kept men alive inside frozen monasteries. They built no furnaces. They prayed, they worked, they layered. And in doing so, they turned simplicity into survival. They slept close, even when walls divided them. Each monk had his own stone cell, his own silence, but not isolation. The monastery was built like a heartbeat. Cells arranged side by side walls, touching warmth flowing between them. Those shared walls held more than weight, they held heat. One body's breath, another's stillness, both pressed warmth into the stone, and by nightfall, that warmth returned. Quietly, steadily, faithfully. They didn't know the math, but they understood the rhythm. When stone connected stone, when man slept beside man, separated by prayer, joined by breath, the cold lost its edge. In the dead of winter, a lone cell could fall below freezing, but a cluster of cells wall to wall stayed 20 to 30% warmer, enough to keep the pulse steady, the candle alive. It wasn't about crowding, it was communion. They didn't share rooms, they shared warmth through stone and stillness. Sometimes survival wasn't found in fire or fur. It was found in faith and proximity. You see, warmth doesn't always come from flame. Sometimes it comes from each other. Today, soldiers and explorers use the same wisdom cluster, sleeping, huddling side by side to trade heat and hope. But the monks had lived it centuries before, wrapped in vows and silence. They didn't fight the cold alone. They endured it together. No fireplace, no roaring flame, just candles and faith. The monks knew light could do more than guide prayers. It could warm flesh if treated right. A single candle trembling in the dark barely touched the air, but place it inside a clay pot and the heat took on a different soul. The flame licked the terracotta walls, the clay absorbed its breath, and slowly, ever so slowly, released it back like a sigh from the earth itself. 2 or 3 small candles beneath a clay bowl could lift the chill from a stone cell 3 meters wide. It wasn't fire you could see from across the room. It was gentler warmth that wrapped you, not burned you. The air softened by 5, maybe 6 degrees, enough to turn the stone from cruel to kind, enough to bring color back to fingers that had forgotten motion. Each night, they'd light them not for comfort, but for endurance. A quiet ritual, wax melting flame, bowing shadows dancing against the wall. The glow spread slowly like breath shared between souls. When the candles died, the warmth lingered faint, steady, faithful. To them, it wasn't invention, it was devotion. Light became warmth, faith became fire. They didn't need great furnaces or roaring hearths, just earth wax and patience. The clay radiators they made were humble, fragile, but alive, as if the spirit of the flame had learned humility inside the clay. And centuries later, the same wisdom returns. The terracotta candle heater, modern homes, ancient principle. Same clay, same breath, same quiet miracle. You can almost feel it, that kind of warmth that doesn't shout. It waits, it stays, still, human. In those cold monasteries, that soft heat was more than comfort. It was a reminder that even the smallest light, when held by the right hands, can change the night itself. The wind was their oldest enemy. It crept through cracks in the stone, whispered across the cold floors, and stole warmth faster than any frost. The monks couldn't banish it, but they learned to tame it. And in that stillness, they found a kind of peace. Their cells were small, carved into the thick monastery walls, barely enough space for a cot, a candle, and a prayer. Yet a single gap, no wider than a finger, could turn a place of worship into a frozen tomb. They learned this the hard way, through sleepless nights and stiff morning prayers. So they began to listen, to study the wind as if it were a living creature, restless, wild, but predictable. They didn't fight it with brute strength. They answered it with patience. Behind every shutter they hung leather goat hide, sometimes sheepskin rough on the outside, soft within. It flexed and breathed, slowing the air instead of stopping it. Then came the linen layer light, porous and alive. Two skins, two elements, the earth and the field, bound by purpose. Together they transformed a draft into a whisper. It wasn't perfect. The wind still hummed, the cold still lingered, but the sharp sting faded. The air softened, the candles burned steady, and their hands no longer trembled at dawn prayers. They didn't chase heat. They shaped it. By guiding the flow, not blocking it, they turned chaos into calm. They discovered that warmth isn't always born from fire. Sometimes it comes from understanding. Modern tests would confirm what faith once taught: a 70% drop in wind speed, no trapped moisture, no rot. Primitive, number elegant, balanced, and even today, their wisdom endures. Engineers call it a breathing wall, a living barrier that shields, insulates, and exhales. But for those monks, it was never architecture. It was empathy, a covenant between man and the elements. Because to survive the cold, they didn't close the world out. They let just enough in. Warmth, after all, isn't only about heat. It's about harmony and wisdom. Their nights weren't quiet. Every few hours, the bells would ring, pulling them from sleep back into prayer. Cold stone, thin air, half dream, half devotion. Most men would freeze from such a rhythm, body heat dropping each time the blankets were thrown aside. But the monks moved differently. Between psalms and silence, they breathed slow, deep, rhythmic, the kind of breathing that warms you from the inside out. They stood, bowed, sat, never fully still, never wasting warmth. The motion was gentle, almost invisible, yet each small movement kept the blood alive, the fingers pink, the heart steady. It was an exercise. It was faith in motion. During long vigils, they found balance between stillness and survival. Their short sleeps, broken by bells, never froze them. The rhythm of prayer became the rhythm of heat. Science would later call this micro-movement thermal cycling, the body's way of maintaining warmth through controlled breath and subtle motion. But they didn't need a name. They had purpose. In the quiet of midnight, their chants echoed softly against the stone. The air shimmered faintly around them, not from fire, but from the warmth of endurance. You can almost imagine it: rows of monks' candles, flickering low breath, clouding the air, moving just enough to stay alive, believing just enough to stay warm. They didn't just survive the cold, they harmonized with it. Faith kept their souls burning, rhythm kept their bodies alive. And when dawn finally came, the frost still clung to the windows, but inside, warmth lingered, quiet, steady, human. Morning light slipped through the narrow window, pale, soft, almost shy. Steam curled from a cup of water, faint and silver in the cold air. The monastery was still. No crackling fire, no smoke, just breath, candlelight, and faith. They never fought the winter, they lived with it. Every stone, every wall, every night's silence became part of the same conversation between man and cold. Where we flip a switch for heat, they lit a single flame and whispered a prayer. And somehow, it was enough. The warmth they found wasn't loud. It didn't roar or blaze. It settled quietly, humbly inside them. Through patience, through rhythm, through belief. Because the truth is simple. In a world of ice and stone, warmth doesn't come from flame alone. It comes from the will to keep believing, even when the night stays long. The wind outside sighed through the valley, and the first bell of dawn rang clear. Somewhere below the smoke of a forge began to rise the sound of hammers waking the earth. Tomorrow we'll follow that sound down to the blacksmith's village, where fire doesn't just warm, it shapes life itself.